Hey, good morning. Hope your morning's off to a good start. And getting excited for 4th of July, as I am. It's always been my favorite holiday. But anyway, just going to talk a couple of things. This might be a little shorter than normal, rather than throwing just tons and tons of economic charts and all of that. I'm going to look at why I'm kind of bullish on nuclear, on the energy, focus on energy a little bit. And then what I'll do next time is we'll get more into the economic stuff, back to that. I'm making some changes in portfolios. I'll go over that. But the other thing I wanted to start with, again, some house cleaning. I'm going to talk a lot about this over the next month or two. As you may or may not know, Charles Schwab bought TD Ameritrade about 3 or 4 years ago. And for the most part, they just sat there trying to build out their plan for, how are they going to convert all this over, everything like that. So this year, they basically announced that on the day after Labor Day, all of your TD Ameritrade accounts will be at Schwab. Okay, so that's a migration. TD Ameritrade is going away. So you may or may not have gotten a letter from Schwab. Schwab is starting to send out letters, just alerting people to the timeline that's coming up and what's going to happen, the conversion, everything along those lines. And the thing is, they're not sending like to all my clients at once, the letters, so they're parsing out. So you may have already gotten a letter. I know some people who have like simple IRAs, SEP IRAs, retirement plans like that. They have gotten a letter. Some haven't. So it's probably going to come. All this first letter is going to say is, hey, TD's moving to Schwab, and here's the timeline. So this is just an alert letter. And then what's going to happen is next month, they're going to open up the ability for you to create your username and password at Schwab. Again, it's going to be, I don't have an exact date when that's going to happen because they're doing it in batches. And it's not like they're taking all of Picket Fence clients and doing that at once. They have their system. Looks like they're doing it with retirement plans first, and then going down to other plans after that, IRAs, taxable accounts, trust accounts, all of that. So, excuse me. So once you set that up, basically that's all you have to do. And then on September 5th, when you wake up after Labor Day, you log into TD, you're going to see there's nothing there. It's all going to be moving to Schwab. You use your Schwab credentials, you're going to be in there. Now, I talked about, I'm looking for different providers. I'm not real happy moving to Schwab. Firm I first started at was at Schwab originally. And we actually moved, when I was at that firm, we moved away from Schwab for a few reasons. One, they were marketing directly to our clients. Two, the technology wasn't quite as good because they focused mostly on retail and their planning services. And then three, unless you're a multi-billion-dollar firm, they don't really give you the top-tier service. So I wasn't real enthused, but I've been looking at things, and I'm not ready to pull triggers at other brokerages, custodians, anything like that. So what I'm really trying to do in the interim is figure out which path I'm going to take Picket Fence Financial. So I mentioned in the last presentation I did, one thing I'm looking at is kind of becoming under the umbrella of a bigger firm. There's a couple firms that are $2 billion to $4 billion. They've got registered investment advisors like me all over the country. Basically, Picket Fence stays the same. It's just that I kind of come underneath them, and they handle back office stuff, the paperwork, the compliance issues. it's just a lot of that kind of stuff. And so I may go that way. And if I go that way, Schwab is one of their custodians that they both use. So migrating to Schwab now kind of makes sense if I decide to do that. I don't want to migrate from somewhere and then come back to Schwab again. So I'm going to let the migration to Schwab happen, and then we'll see where it goes from there. The other option I'm looking for the business is teaming up with another planner, and we kind of build sort of the back office, the service, the compliance. There's a lot of potential with some of the planning tools that are out there that we can use. And at that point, we probably move to a new custodian. So I'm just trying to decide, do I want to, put the work in to, start to build sort of a back end, and then we'll add more advisors as time progresses, and build something there of our own and try to become that, $4 billion firm? Or do I just want to kind of migrate over, just focus on what I'm doing now and stay that way? So having some conversations. I don't have any deadline on either yet. It's probably going to be more 2024, because I really want to spend a lot of time thinking about this and doing due diligence and all that kind of stuff. So just to give you a heads up, you're probably going to be getting letters. Don't freak out. Don't think your money's been moved yet. It's just part of the transitions. Again, Schwab bought them 4 years. I think it was 4 years ago, and they just, I guess they've been building out the process to make everything happen. One other caveat: once we do move over, I'm being told everything will be seamless, and I do believe that moving the accounts over themselves probably isn't going to be a very big issue. What I'm worried about is if you have a monthly deposit, or if we have a checking account on file, something like that, there could be an issue. So if you are getting a monthly deposit, something systematic, and then it doesn't show up, let me know, because I think that's where there could be a little trick here, because technically Schwab's moving this stuff over. They're not. I don't know if they're going to your bank to get approval to set this up or not. So I think there could be some issues with that, but I'm not sure. I never believe everything's a perfect seamless move over. So there could be a little bit of bumps, particularly if you are getting, monthly, quarterly distributions. So anyway, enough of that. Let's jump into the slides. And I'm starting off today. I get a lot of questions. Again, all this stuff is based on questions I get from you for the most part. So I usually get people like, what do you recommend for us to get more education? What sites are good, and also what sites are free? So these are some of the things that I look at a lot, and there's no cost to these. So I've got some subscriptions that I pay for, but these are some free ones. And if you want to go on YouTube, there's really, there's 3 sites that I spend a lot of time on. Usually I'm working and I'll be listening to it. They have a lot of great guests with really a lot of different opinions on the markets and the economy. And I just find it to be some of the best content out there that's free. So you'll typically get hour-long interviews with some fund managers, economists, all kinds of stuff. So if you go to YouTube, the 2 I really like are Blockworks and Wealthion. Both of those are really good sites. Really have a lot of great interviews. And then the third one would be Bloomberg. Bloomberg puts out some pretty good information. I especially like Bloomberg's longer interviews, not sort of their short segments, their news segment kind of thing. I like their longer stuff, but those are some of the things. If you like to read some really good newsletters, there's a lot out there on newsletter side, but the ones that I find myself kind of taking time and just reading like on a Saturday and absorbing it. The first one is I've mentioned Jeremy Grantham quite a few times over the past couple of years. He is one of the founders of GMO Investments, I think it is, or something like that, GMO Asset Management. But they put out a really good quarterly newsletter. And why I like GMO is Jeremy Grantham and his team have been just unbelievable in being able to predict. They look at the next 7 years and for all different asset classes, what are the projected returns? And if you go all the way back, I think I first discovered him in the late 90s or early 2000s. But if you go back that far and you look at his quarterly newsletters and you read through it and see what his predictions are, I mean, nobody's absolutely perfect, but he's really good. And right now it's a little depressing when you see them because they're not real optimistic. Another one that's a weekly newsletter, it's a gentleman called John Malden at maldeneconomics.com. And he puts out this thing, Thoughts from the Front Line. Again, I've been reading John since probably 2003 or 4. Every week, he's got great stuff, interviews lots of different people, but really a good thinker on what's going on in markets. Another one that I read, quarterly newsletter, John Hussman. He's really sort of a historian of financial markets, and you can get his quarterly newsletter for free at husbandfunds.com. That's another really good one. And then if you want more personal finance, not so much heavy lifting of macroeconomics and market valuations and all that crazy stuff, but you just kind of want to get a good feeling for how to save some money here and there, or little pitfalls to avoid in your personal finances. You probably have seen Clark Howard. He was on CNN. I don't know if he's still on there, but he was on it for years, like on Saturday mornings. And he's got a newsletter. If you go to clark.com newsletters, you can get that. But he's probably one of the best of no BS personal finance. No, he has no objective when he makes these recommendations. So he's probably one of the better ones if you want personal finance stuff. So, that's probably pretty good. I mean, if you want to start spending money, you can get into paid newsletters. But I think most people are just saying, look, where can I get some more information, more educational stuff where I learn a little bit? Some of it might be, when you hear it, if you're not really into it, might sound like gibberish. But, as you watch stuff more and more, you start to pick it up. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about, I mentioned energy is a huge issue going forward. We've underinvested in the energy infrastructure completely. And the fact that we think that solar and wind are going to somehow replace this stuff is absolutely ludicrous. But I've got a small position right now in an ETF that basically invest in the whole landscape of uranium. And I mean, I think it's flat or a little down for the year. As soon as I bought it, it went down. And then it's come back. But I want to show you sort of why I've been thinking about uranium and nuclear, and why I think longer term it's going to be phenomenal. And I think even in the short term, we're probably going to see some pretty good stuff with nuclear and uranium. And so, I always talk about we've always moved from more energy dense materials over time. I put up here, the British Empire was basically the reason you have the British Empire is because they were on the front end of energy as it related to their navy. At first, obviously, all navies were, hoisting the sails, using wind power, but the British Navy was the first to move to coal. So they went to, steam engines and coal-powered engines, and it gave them an enormous advantage over other navies. So they were on the cutting edge of that. And then they were the first ones to move to diesels. And then they were the first ones to move to sort of, natural gas based. And then now we're taking the lead. And basically our major fleets, our naval fleets, are all powered by nuclear. Submarines have been that way for more than 15 or 16 years completely. But even now, your aircraft carriers and some of your cruisers and destroyers are nuclear. So, and not only does it give you more energy, but it frees you up tactically as well, because before you had your aircraft carrier and some ships around it to protect it, and you had this massive oiler. This oiler is what would refuel you while you're at sea. But if you have nuclear, you could run for decades without having to refuel. So it really opens things up strategically as well. Uranium is absolutely the most energy dense source of energy that we've got. This chart just kind of shows you what one uranium fuel pellet, just one pellet, and it's got as much energy as 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas, 149 gallons of oil, and 1 ton of coal. So this thing is extremely energy dense. And another sort of offshoot of the density here, how long could 1 pound of nuclear fuel power a light bulb? So that's what we're trying to look at. So coal, 1 pound of coal, you get 2 days of burning your light bulb. Natural gas bumps it up to 3. If you go to the old kind of nuclear reactors, you could get 64 years based on, the light water reactor where they need the water to cool everything. But the new reactors that they have now, really the 4th generation, they're really a lot more, they're safer. They don't require the water as much. There's so many foolproof ways. They're so much smaller, the footprint. But the newer ones could power a light bulb for over 1,900 years for 1 pound of fuel. So you can see it's very dense. This is just another way to show you kind of density of fuel. So this is just for the amount of the fuel source, how much fuel comes out of it. And uranium is, by far the best. And the thing is, I've been talking about this. I'm going to continue to talk about energy a lot. It might bore you to death. But it's important because energy is the economy, period. End of story. If you don't have cheap energy, you don't have a robust economy. And it's the correlation is so perfect that you can't deny it. Countries that have trouble getting cheap energy do not have robust economies. If you look at, some of the third world countries, they just don't have the energy infrastructure. So they are not going to come anywhere close to what our economy is, mostly because they're capped by energy. There could be other caps. Maybe they don't have the same rule of law. Maybe they don't have the entrepreneurial spirit or pseudo capitalism. There could be other things like that. But even if they had a government that was completely dedicated to pure capitalism, the rule of law, everything like that, they still aren't going to project themselves forward unless they have access to energy. And you can kind of see the countries that have the cheapest energy also have the largest economies. And it shouldn't surprise anybody, with the US, of course, being the top dog here. So the only one interesting that has some really good GDP, but not as much of an energy footprint is Ireland. 20 years ago, they started to draw people in due to lower tax rates. A lot of tech companies, computer companies, which weren't as energy intensive as, say, manufacturing, they have done a pretty good job of being able to do that. But yet it's not because they have a lack of excess of energy. It's just the companies that have moved there haven't been as energy dependent as some of the others. But it still means you got to have cheap energy to have a robust economy, period. So I just want to go through, I've shown these slides a couple times. This is our global energy consumption by different sources, going all the way back to 1800. And you can see from 1800 really until probably the early 1900s, it was all traditional biomass. What does that mean? It means you're chopping down a tree and you're burning it for fuel. That's what it means. That kind of stuff could be dung, right? Hard dung that they used. I'd hate to have to go back to using that, but they use things like that, but it's actual just biodegradable materials. And then coal started to take a huge part of the energy infrastructure. And then when you pretty much got to the 1920s, 1930s, that's when oil started to make its presence really felt as far as a major source. And then since then, we've added, natural gas, nuclear, hydropower, all of these others have kind of come out since post World War II. And then, so you can kind of see, but the consumption that we've been doing globally, it's just been absolutely massive, the amount of energy that we consume. And even if we stay at the population that we're at now, even if the human population doesn't grow, as some of these third world countries start to hopefully develop the energy infrastructure, they're going to want to have a higher standard of living than they do now. And it's pretty crude for us to try to deny them based on climate crisis or climate science or anything like that, while we're sitting here with iPhones and lattes and all of those things. So even if the population remains the same, you can still see this upward trajectory on the amount of energy that we're going to need. So again, I'm going to break it down by each thing now. You can see biomass it's still a very prevalent energy, when you compare it back to decades and centuries before. We're still using as much, if not more, than we've ever used before. Mostly up and coming economies are still using this. It's not unusual if you're in the Philippines or a third world country that you might chop down a tree for energy. That's what's going to provide your heat. Philippines may not be the right example there because it doesn't get all that cold, but some of these places that they're still using a lot of biomass. And oddly enough, as Germany shut down their nuclear power plants last year, and then with Russia happening and the natural gas slowing, they were using more wood and biomass because they had to keep their economy going. You can see coal's presence has only gotten bigger over time, and despite all of the complaints about carbon emissions and all this stuff, coal is still growing in size, and it's still going to continue to grow in the near future, at least if people want to have cheaper energy that powers the economy. Oil, of course, is getting still to be bigger and bigger all the time, and it's still going to be a massive part. It is the largest energy source right now. So it's not something that we can replace even if we wanted to. So the fact that we've been underinvesting in this area in the United States for quite some time, but especially the past, 15 years, I wouldn't even say 15 years, I'd say more like, 3 years, but it's going to have a massive impact going forward because the demand is still going to be there, but the supply is going to be hindered. So you're going to see, that's why I'm still, even though we've got one small position in oil right now, Permian Resources, but everything else, we're out of it right now only because things have headed south, but longer term, I'm very bullish on oil. Natural gas becoming a bigger and bigger part of the energy infrastructure. You can see it's now the second largest part of our energy infrastructure worldwide. But then you start to see, okay, nuclear, it's growing, but it's not growing all that fast. Hydropower is still a very decent sized part of our infrastructure. But then, look at wind. There's no way you can grow wind to take up coal or take up oil or gas, anything like that. The amount of infrastructure needed to do that is just beyond compare. And I've done a presentation on that before. I'll probably revisit it later this year. Solar, same story, same exact story. In fact, I was I didn't get it into the slide here. I wanted to show that there was a huge solar farm in Nebraska that, you know, covered lots of farming land, and then they had a really bad hailstorm and basically destroyed the entire solar farm. So solar is just not going to get there. You know, people who want solar, I get it, right? The sun's always out there, it's free, you want to do it, but when you really get into the numbers, it's pretty ridiculous, and there's no way that we're going to be able to get to where it's a sizable part of our energy infrastructure anytime soon. Modern biofuels, again, very small part. Okay, so and just to give you one more different view of this over time, showing you kind of the percentage. So back in 2000, this is for U.S. energy, not the world, but U.S. You know, coal in 2000 was about 23% of the energy. Now it's 13. Natural gas is 24. Now it's 30. Petroleum was 38. And it's still 36. Nuclear has been about 8% the whole time. Hydroelectric 2.7. You know, wind has come up to 2.5 over a 18-year period, and so has solar to about 1%. So it's taken us 18 years, and we've only gotten about 3.5% from wind and solar. So that is not the answer. And the thing is, if you want clean energy, there's nothing better than nuclear. Absolutely nothing better. There's absolutely no carbon emissions whatsoever. If you believe that that's the reason that, you know, we're having issues. So you're getting a very, very clean energy, but you're also getting the density that you need to keep a strong economy. Now, nuclear had a incredibly horrible bear market from basically 2011 until 2018, start of 2019. And a lot of that's due to Fukushima. You know, once that happened, despite the fact that there were no deaths from it, but just the freak out and the press and everything along those lines, you know, within 24 months, Japan took all the reactors offline. Basically, the rest of the world started to follow that as well. Uranium and all fuel cell product services declined for the few years after that. So you essentially had this where nuclear was at one time looking to be the future. And then after Fukushima, you know, basically everybody moved away from it. The folks that like solar and wind started to condemn it as some sort of, you know, we're all going to be burning our skin. We're going to have, you know, nuclear waste all over us and that kind of thing. It didn't happen. So you can also see, you know, the price of uranium themselves. These are two different forms of uranium used in nuclear, but you can kind of see the first chart, the U308, the bull market in that price sort of kicked up 2009. I mean, it went almost parabolic and then came back after Fukushima and has been drifting lower ever since up until, you know, 2018, 2019. And now it's moved back up. The chart on the right is the UF6 price, a different kind of uranium, but here again, you can kind of see parabolic in sort of 08, 09, dropped considerably after Fukushima and drifted lower. But then once we got to like 2018, we've seen a move up since then in the price of the actual underlying uranium commodity. And the thing is, countries are starting to figure this out. They're starting to move pretty quickly to realize the carbon emissions that they're all agreeing to, that they're going to have to move to uranium and nuclear. So South Korea here, you can see they want to have a target for 30% of their energy coming from nuclear by 2030. And this is after they had basically phased it out completely. Japan's back on, you know, they've started to realize that the newer reactors are a completely different world than what Fukushima was, one of the old kind of 3 Mile Island looking reactors. So they've restarted 10 reactors. They want 20% of their energy from nuclear by 2030. And then they're going to bring in another 20 online soon enough. And Poland's going to be adding more with some micro reactors, some of the newer sort of fourth derivative of nuclear reactors. China is going to go gangbusters here. They want to have 150 gigawatts of nuclear by 2035, which is almost 3 times what they're doing now. So they've got 23 reactors under construction and 45 planned, and then eventually they want to have 156 nuclear reactors. So we need to learn. We need to follow what China's doing here. They understand it. U.S. Department of Energy, which is kind of crazy. It came out with the Infrastructure Act that just came out, but they're now proposing 200 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2040. And I think once we really start to settle in, we'll see that number go up. But the Department of Energy has not been talking about nuclear at all. And now they're at least starting to say that we need to add new nuclear. So there's a lot of trends going for it. This one gets a little bit more in the weeds, but there's now once the price collapsed, you also saw mining collapse. So a lot of the utility companies around the world had a sort of surplus. They had uranium stored up. That's going away. So we're starting to see a point where there's really a big structural supply deficit with uranium. And, we think that if they're going to if the utilities are going to start to really commit to it, if they can, they're going to want to have supply. So they're probably thinking supply at these prices, even though they've started to rise, supply at these prices is a lot better than waiting a couple years, 3-5 years, hoping that the market will catch up. Because if demand goes up and supply doesn't keep with it, they're going to be paying much higher prices. The other thing is uranium is starting to get some interest from the finance world. There's a Sprott fund that purchases the actual underlying uranium and stores it. So they've been doing that. So you now have a little bit of competition from the financial world, whereas before the only people ever interested in really buying uranium were the utilities. The other thing is that I keep talking about this 4th generation of reactors, small modular reactors. They're expected to add 200 million pounds of cumulative demand by 2035. So a lot of, especially China, a lot of countries are adding new nuclear plants, and this is what's going to be driving the whole reason for uranium and nuclear. So basically, the past decade we've had under investment in development of new resources of uranium. So it's really kind of put us in a shortfall from the supply side. And interesting enough, the International Energy Association, their net zero by 2050 plan, which we heard about, everybody talks about that. And it's a lot of solar, a lot of wind. But it is actually expecting by 2040 for nuclear to double its use, because I think they're starting to come to the realization that they can't get carbon neutral with wind and solar. They're still delusional, but they're starting to come around. They're going to see that nuclear is probably the only way we get there. So just on the price of uranium itself, if you look at it, the last bull market peak was $134 per pound. If you adjust that for inflation, you could see it go to 200 just to get back to where it was. That's assuming it could get there. And, with it roughly around $50 a pound today, just that alone, there could be some potential with uranium investments. And the other thing, I keep bashing solar and wind. And look, if you want to get solar panels, great, go ahead. But the reality is I'm looking at it for more of a macro sector. What you're getting is you get twice the amount of output for half the cost compared to solar and wind. Sure, solar and wind's getting better, but even if you improve that technology, you've got to have a massive increase in battery technology in order to store solar and wind. You don't need that for nuclear. It's always on, right? That's the other big thing I always bash solar and wind about is really when you look at the amount of, once you put those solar panels up or you have that windmill going, the amount of uptime is really small. It's less than 35 or 36% for both of them. Whereas with nuclear, you've got a 90%, 92% uptime all the time. So, it's just, I think we may be a little early on this, but I think at some point people are really going to understand nuclear is the path. And I think, if we didn't have people scaring folks of thinking that their skin was going to be, hit with all kinds of uranium clouds or stuff like that, or in the water, I think if you just looked at it, you'd absolutely jump at it because it's just so obvious. This kind of just hits on some more reasons why I think it's an early part of the bull market, which could be years in the making. Again, remember, we're only about 8% right now. And if we really wanted to reduce our oil, natural gas, and coal here in the US, if it got up to 50%, I mean, you're talking about a massive, massive expansion. They're going to start to find they're not going to get that. They're not going to be able to take away a lot with solar and wind. They're just not. Okay. And, even interesting enough, the United Nations, the last point here, last bullet point, the COP27, that's basically United Nations. They talk about energy and carbon and all this, but hundreds of people that are overpaid to go sit and talk about stuff. That's typically how I see the UN. But they're like the first this was the first conference that they even talked about nuclear energy. So it's very early in the discussions. And this is the new sort of fourth generation plant that you've got. So compare that, the 3 Mile Island here, look how massive that is. Top to bottom, how much it took for the old, first generation, second generation legacy nuclear power plants. That's what they look like. And then you look at today's, I mean, this footprint is really, really small. And the other thing is these things are so much more efficient. Going back to that light bulb slide, it's probably 6 or 7 times more efficient than the huge 3 Mile Islands of Fukushima's, all that stuff. So you can have these without making an enormous footprint. And I'm not going to get into how these things are much safer. These things you can actually have no staff and it can shut itself down if it needs to. There's just so much more safety capability. And, for people who are nervous about it, just remember the Navy is using these. Basically the same technology as this, not a plant per se, but it's inside the submarine or the aircraft carrier. And it's running just like this. And they could be out to sea for 150 years if they wanted to without coming in. So it's just very advanced. And even better is they're now getting to the point where they can retrofit coal plants to become nuclear. They can't do it for all coal plants, but there's a sizable number of coal plants that they can now, with this new technology in uranium, retrofit this stuff and make a coal plant, turn it into a uranium nuclear plant. So there's a lot of potential for it once people start to come around. As far as investments, like right now I mentioned, we're kind of invested in an ETF that a very small percentage of your portfolio, but it looks at all of the uranium, the miners, processors, everything like that. So I'm just sort of like, I'm not sure where to go. I don't know how to value this stuff yet. So I'm just kind of taking a little share of it. But if you compare it versus the actual underlying uranium, so the mining companies and then the infrastructure companies. So if you take the miners and divide it by the actual price of uranium, it's at a pretty low point. So there's a lot of potential to invest in the companies that are involved in the uranium infrastructure. I just threw this thing out here, deaths. You can kind of see from the different energy, when people try to scare you off on nuclear, the number of deaths are so minuscule. Yeah, I think like 10 people died in Russia when Chernobyl happened. It was more like, I always say it's more like watching, if you had the Three Stooges go in and try to stop the meltdown. That's kind of what happened. They just handled everything incorrectly, and that's why some of the people that went in there end up getting radiation exposure. But really from air pollution and even accidents, the number of deaths are just minuscule compared to other energies. And the thing is, the other you got to remember is the radioactivity of the uranium. It drops like a rock. So by the time you get to 40 years down the road, so if you use the uranium and then you stored it, in an underground bunker, by the time it was down there for 40 years, it's probably not a whole lot worse than putting your cell phone up to your head, honestly, as far as the radioactivity exposure for you. And then you look at countries like France that do such a phenomenal job of recycling the uranium that you can continue the life of it for such a long time. It's really just amazing. I don't know why this hasn't been, for folks who want carbon-free, energy-dense sources of energy. It's absolutely the way to go. California, I've shown this slide before as well. It's a little dated. It's only 2017, but compared to the rest of the U.S., California's electricity has gone up 5 times more than the rest of the country. Now, part of that could have been during that period, maybe an influx of people, put a demand on it. But really what it was is it was idiocy on the part of the government out there. They rely heavily on the Hoover and Glen Canyon dams, which, if you follow the news at all, the Colorado River is not as robust as it's been in the years past. So the energy there has been dropping. But then even the big issue this past year has been the Diablo Canyon power plant. This is a nuclear power plant. Kicks off 18,000 gigawatts of energy hours per year. Easily twice the amount that the Hoover Dam and Glen Canyon Dam. Well, they were trying to shut that down, and they've really been fighting California as their politics. They have been fighting nuclear like crazy. And they were about to shut this thing down last year. Newsom, to his credit, basically overrode the Democrat legislature out there, and it said, no, we're going to keep it going, because he probably did some simple math and realized they'd be in big trouble if they did. So investing in nuclear, there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can buy individual stocks. Like I said, I'm not at the point where I feel comfortable really understanding that yet. I'm subscribed to some paid newsletters, trying to learn more about that. You can invest in the commodity itself too, if you wanted to. You've got I mentioned previously the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. It just invests in pounds of uranium and stores it. And then you've got several ETFs. That's kind of the way I've gone with it now. So if you want more diversified, these are the top ETFs. And then a royalty company, uranium royalty company. Royalty companies are sort of a pseudo investment in there, because what they basically do is they serve as a bank to mining companies. So they get a little bit of the upside of the actual uranium price and profits of the miners, but they also have a very high interest component to it. So a nice dividend kicking off of it. So as they loan more and more, they'll probably see a nicer and nicer dividend off of that. So Uranium Royalty Corp. And you have to remember the whole landscape of the uranium investment is about, I think it's only like $3 billion. It's not big at all. I mean, unless you invest in the actual utilities. But so it's a very small market, and if it gets any kind of serious movement towards it, it's got a lot of potential. Okay, so I always finish off with my disclaimers. You can take a read to this if you want. If you like legalese, be happy to do that. So let's see. I don't see any questions today. Okay. So hopefully this came off okay. I didn't have my heavy-duty podcasting microphone today, so I'm using my computer microphone. Didn't sound as good, but hopefully it worked okay. And then, like I said, you're going to get some information from Schwab. Don't panic about it. It's just they're letting you know it's coming. But a month from now, you can set up your username and password. And then once we get to the end of the summer, right after Labor Day, we're going to be at Schwab. So nothing I can do about that one. And like I said, I'm not ready to make a leap to any other custodian yet. So I don't see any other questions on this. I probably put everybody to sleep with uranium. That's probably the last thing you want to talk about Saturday of a holiday weekend. But next time we'll talk a little bit more about moves I'm making this upcoming week, and maybe I'll dig back into some more global macro kind of economic stuff. If you have questions, please send them to me. I always like to try to incorporate those. So thank you so much, and I will talk to you all later. Take care.